So this material is a really comprehensive look at the 2025 political fallout around the Epstein files, especially the threads involving Trump and Clinton.
It's an invaluable resource. The depth of research, from DOJ memos to congressional emails, is extraordinary. I think we should just jump right in and talk about how to maximize its impact.
Okay, so as I'm reading it, the core argument is that the official attempts to contain all this were just, constantly being undermined by new information, especially in the back half of 2025.
That's definitely the conflict, but I think we can sharpen the narrative focus on official deception versus the actual material disclosure.
Okay.
Right now, the weakness is that, while it's chronological, it presents the official denials, like that big July 7th DOJ memo saying no client list, and that Epstein died by suicide, and then the later disclosures as sort of separate events.
Right. It's like this happened, then that happened.
Exactly. And by doing that, you're missing the chance to build a really powerful case about institutional obfuscation. You have this massive contradiction, but you aren't really using the tension between the two to drive the story forward.
That makes sense. So we're telling it as A, then B, then C. But you're saying we should be telling it as they said A, but then B proved A was a complete lie.
Precisely. The suggestion is to reframe the whole thing around this central axis of deception and exposure. I mean, you could use the most definitive official statement, that July 7th DOJ memo, as the main pivot point.
And contrast it immediately with everything that came later.
Immediately and dramatically.
Okay, I see the power in that, front-loading the dramatic irony, but is there a risk if we mess with the chronology too much that we confuse the reader who's trying to follow the timeline?
That's a fair point, but I don't think it has to be confusing if the contrast is sharp enough. By making that official lie the starting point, you're signaling to the reader what this is really about.
It's about the breakdown of trust.
Exactly. The chronology then just becomes the evidence trail proving the deception.
Okay, so give me a concrete example.
For instance, you could start by highlighting that DOJ FBI conclusion, the no credible evidence of blackmail line. That's the thesis the rest of the piece needs to just aggressively tear down.
Right.
Then, right after that, you slam it against the political reality that followed. You jump to the unanimous Senate approval of the Epstein Files Transparency Act on November 18th.
Less than 5 months later.
Yes. And that vote basically forced the DOJ's hand, completely undermining their earlier statement. That unanimous vote is so key. It shows the entire political class rejecting the official story.
You're right. You have to emphasize that.
And use the specific details of the public uproar. Bring in Joe Rogan calling it a line in the sand, or Alex Jones's reaction. It just highlights how thoroughly the public rejected the narrative and creates this sense of a cover-up unraveling in real time.
I like that. Focusing on that contrast, the nothing to see here memo versus the political tidal wave by November, gives the whole piece a much more compelling arc.
It stops being just a list of events and starts being an argument, which is what this kind of material really needs to be.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the sections on Trump and Clinton. The detail on their relationships with Epstein is, extremely well supported.
The detail is superb, but I think we need to start leveraging those parallel biographies for a much more direct comparative analysis.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the weakness is that the deep dives into Trump's relationship, the Mar-a-Lago ban, the terrific guy quote, all of it, and then Clinton's association with the 17 Lolita Express flights and so on, they run on parallel tracks.
I see. They don't really speak to each other.
They never speak to each other, and that misses a huge chance to offer a broader, more systemic analysis of how powerful men behave in the same toxic orbit. You have two amazing case studies that never actually get compared.
So we're not just listing their connections, we're analyzing their shared strategies for getting away from the scandal once things got hot.
That's it exactly. My suggestion is to structure a key section explicitly around that comparison. You could analyze them through shared thematic lenses, like, say, the proximity paradox and the strategy of denial.
I like those phrases, proximity paradox, strategy of denial. They sound sharp, but how do we make them feel natural and not like we're just dropping in academic terms?
We just use them as labels for what we're seeing. For the proximity paradox, we're basically asking, how close you were and for how long affect how you tried to break away?
Got it.
So the closer you were, the more complicated the denial has to be.
Precisely. And we have great material for this. For a concrete example, you contrast the timelines. Trump allegedly bans Epstein from Mar-a-Lago in 2007, pretty late, after an incident involving a member's daughter.
Okay.
Compare that with Clinton's very concentrated association, which seems to just taper off quickly around 2003, right after those 17 flights. When you put those timelines next to each other, you see different kinds of proximity and different kinds of separation.
One was a very public, aggressive ban, and the other just quietly faded away.
Right. It's a powerful comparison. It shows two powerful figures managing the same risk with different tactics.
So how does the strategy of denial fit into that?
Well, this is where the 2025 documents are so valuable. We can contrast their recent defense mechanisms directly. Compare the White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson saying Trump's photos were cherry-picked because everyone knew that man.
Right, trying to normalize it?
Versus Ghislaine Maxwell's Justice Department interview in August with Todd Blanche.
That's the one where she goes out of her way to protect Clinton.
Yes. She claims he was her friend, not Epstein's, and says Clinton absolutely never went to the island. Putting those two defenses side by side, one blaming photo selection, the other using a convicted conspirator as a proxy, it starts to reveal some really interesting patterns in how power protects itself.
It moves the whole conversation from just who flew where to how do these systems of protection actually work?
That's the analytic edge it needs. It takes this mountain of facts you've gathered and gives it a shape, a purpose.
Okay, I think that's a fantastic structural improvement. And finally, let's talk about what I think is really the moral heart of the material. I appreciated the inclusion of the accuser's reactions, like Virginia Giuffre's family demanding the release and the survivors planning to create their own list.
That material is absolutely crucial. But I think we need to integrate that moral compass, the perspective of the accusers, much more deeply.
Okay.
The weakness right now is that by placing the accuser's reaction section near the end, you sort of diminish the motivation behind this whole controversy. It risks reading like just a political scandal, focused on the powerful men, rather than a story about justice for victims.
I see that risk. If you wait till the end, the audience might feel like they've just read a political thriller, not a story about a quest for justice. The focus gets skewed.
It does. Is the connection between all the political drama and the ongoing painful search for justice really clear? Right now, I think those two things feel a bit separate.
So what's the suggestion?
My suggestion is to interlace the accuser's demands right into the points where the political actions feel most self-serving or contradictory. Use their voices as the moral corrective that keeps the whole thing grounded.
So instead of saying, and then the politicians did X, we say, while the politicians were doing X, the accusers were saying Y, demanding Z.
That's the rhythm. It connects the action to the consequence. To make it really concrete, think about this. When you're detailing the House Oversight Committee releasing those emails in November.
Yeah. Right then, you should integrate that quote from Liz Stein, who said the release was needed badly, and that this is not a political issue, it's a crime of sex trafficking. That quote immediately reframes the whole political vote.
That's so much stronger than saving it for the end. It reminds the audience why the Transparency Act mattered in the first place.
And you can push it even further. When you describe the release of that Ghislaine Maxwell interview transcript with Todd Blanche.
The one where she was protecting Clinton?
Exactly. The moment you describe that, you immediately follow it with the reaction from Giuffre's family the very next day. They describe that interview as communicating that child sex trafficking is acceptable and will be rewarded. Wow! Yeah, that linkage is devastatingly effective. It takes a bureaucratic action, releasing a transcript, and slams it right up against the moral outrage of the survivors.
It ensures the pursuit of justice stays the focus, not the political games. That direct link is the most powerful way to use their statements. It grounds the entire narrative in accountability.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we've covered three major areas here. First, sharpening the angle to focus on the political contradictions. Second, using a comparative structure for the Trump and Clinton relationships. And third, weaving the moral urgency of the accuser's statements throughout the whole narrative.
I think that's it. You have 3 sharp, actionable steps for the next revision. First, you reframe the whole narrative around that stark contrast between the DOJ's July memo, the whole no list, no blackmail thing, and the congressional disclosure they were forced into by November.
Right, that becomes the engine of the story. Second, explicitly contrast Trump and Clinton, using those thematic pillars, like the proximity paradox and strategy of denial, to get into a real systematic critique.
And third, make sure those powerful quotes from the accusers, their desire to make their own list, their reaction to the Maxwell interview, are integrated early and often to constantly reinforce the so what of the story.
This has been incredibly helpful.
We genuinely want to help strengthen the material. Please feel free to send us your revised work for another look once you've had a chance to implement some of these changes.